"You're not invited. Laura doesn't want you there," my family texted coldly after I funded their entire wedding. "Then pay for it yourselves, leeches," I snapped, while canceling everything and deleting 62 transfers. I'm Sam, 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I believed family meant something sacred. I believed that when you love someone, you support them through thick and thin, even when it devastates your own wallet and peace of mind. I believed that sacrifice was just part of being a good brother, a good son, a dutiful family member who puts everyone else's happiness before his own well-being. Boy, was I catastrophically wrong. My story starts with my younger sister Laura, 29, who has always been the golden child in our family. Not because she was particularly talented, accomplished, or even kind, but because she possessed a special gift for making everyone around her feel personally responsible for her happiness. She had this way of tilting her head just so, letting her voice crack with practiced vulnerability, and suddenly every problem she created became everyone else's emergency to solve. Growing up in our modest suburban home, Laura never had to work for anything. When she wanted a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday, Mom and Dad scrambled to make it happen, even though it meant putting off necessary repairs to our house's failing roof for another year. When she decided to attend an expensive private college to study art history, a degree that everyone with half a brain knew would lead absolutely nowhere, the entire family rallied to make her impractical dream come true. They took out a second mortgage, Dad worked overtime at the factory, and Mom picked up weekend shifts at the grocery store. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs through community college, surviving on vending machine dinners and 3 hours of sleep, before transferring to a state school where I could afford the tuition. Apparently, being responsible and self-sufficient meant I didn't deserve the same investment in my future. The pattern continued relentlessly into adulthood. Laura bounced from one minimum wage retail job to another, never quite finding her supposed calling, always having some excuse for why this job wasn't right for her creative spirit. Meanwhile, I built a successful career in software development, starting as a junior programmer, and working my way up through sheer determination and 60-hour weeks. I bought my first house at 26, a modest 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood that I chose specifically because the mortgage payments wouldn't stretch my budget. I started my own consulting business at 29, specializing in database optimization for small businesses. By 32, I was pulling in 6 figures annually and had built a client base that respected my work and paid promptly. Laura, meanwhile, was still living in a cramped studio apartment that Mom and Dad helped subsidize monthly, still waiting for life to hand her the happiness and success she felt she intrinsically deserved without effort. Then came Derek, and everything changed for the worse. Derek appeared in Laura's life about 2 years ago, a genuinely charming guy who worked in marketing for a mid-sized insurance company. He wasn't wealthy by any stretch, earning maybe $50,000 a year, but he was stable, reliable, and kind, qualities that were more than anyone in our family had dared hope for regarding Laura's romantic prospects. Her previous boyfriends had been a rotating cast of unemployed musicians, aspiring artists, and guys who borrowed money from her and never paid it back. Within 6 months of meeting Derek, they were talking seriously about marriage. Within a year, they were officially engaged, and Derek had proven himself to be genuinely head over heels in love with my sister, somehow blind to her manipulative tendencies or willing to overlook them. The engagement announcement came at our traditional family Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual that I attended dutifully despite living 40 minutes away. Laura practically glowed as she showed off her modest but genuinely pretty engagement ring, a simple solitaire that Derek had clearly saved for months to afford. Derek beamed beside her, radiating the kind of genuine happiness that made even my cynical heart soften slightly. Mom cried happy tears, Dad shook Derek's hand with the firmness reserved for life's most important moments, and I genuinely felt joy for my sister. Maybe this was it, I thought optimistically. Maybe this was when Laura would finally settle down, become responsible, stop being the family's perpetual crisis that required constant financial and emotional management. Then came the wedding planning, and my naive optimism was crushed under the weight of Laura's limitless expectations. "I want everything to be absolutely perfect," Laura announced during our first official planning meeting at Mom and Dad's house. She had already filled 3 notebooks with ideas, created 17 different Pinterest boards on her phone, and developed dreams that seemed to grow exponentially bigger every time she spoke about them. "This is literally the most important day of my entire life. I want everyone who attends to look back 50 years from now and still remember how completely magical and breathtaking it was." The problem was that Laura's vision of magical came with a price tag that could have funded a small country's annual budget. She wanted the ceremony at Willowbrook Manor, an elegant historical venue that charged $8,000 just for the basic space rental, not including tables, chairs, linens, or anything that would make the space actually usable for a wedding. She wanted flowers exclusively by Helena's Garden, the city's most prestigious florist, whose arrangement started at $3,000 and went up from there. She wanted catering from Savannah's, the upscale restaurant where she and Derek had their first official date, despite the fact that their wedding packages started at $120 per person. She wanted photography by Amanda Chen, whose portfolio looked like it belonged in Vogue, and whose wedding packages started at $4,000 for basic coverage. When all the estimates started rolling in throughout March and April, carefully calculated and recalculated on Mom's old calculator at the kitchen table, the total came to nearly $42,000. $42,000 for one day, for a 6-hour party. Derek's family, while supportive and genuinely excited about the wedding, could contribute maybe $5,000 after considerable sacrifice. His parents were blue-collar workers who had already stretched their budget to help with Derek's student loans. Mom and Dad, living on modest fixed retirement incomes, had managed to scrape together $3,000 by canceling their vacation plans and postponing Dad's minor surgery. Derek himself, still paying off student loans and trying to save for a house down payment, could realistically handle maybe $2,000 without going into debt. That left approximately $32,000 unaccounted for, floating in the air like a financial impossibility that everyone was pretending might solve itself through wishful thinking. The conversation that would change everything happened on a cold Wednesday evening in February. I'd stopped by Mom and Dad's house to fix their ancient computer, which had been running slower than molasses and frustrating them for weeks. When I arrived, I found the entire family gathered around the kitchen table like they were planning a military invasion, surrounded by wedding magazines, vendor brochures, calculators, and notebooks filled with increasingly desperate mathematical calculations. "We just need to scale back significantly," Derek was saying, his voice gentle but increasingly firm as reality set in. "Maybe we could do the reception at the community center, find a less expensive photographer, get flowers from the grocery store." "Absolutely not." Laura's voice was sharp, final, with that edge I recognized from childhood tantrums. "I am not compromising on my wedding day. This is supposed to be the happiest, most perfect day of my entire life, and I will not settle for some bargain basement, pathetic celebration that looks like we're poor." Mom wrung her hands anxiously, her voice pleading. "Honey, we want to give you everything your heart desires, but the money simply isn't there. We've looked at every possible option. What about Sam?" Laura's calculating eyes turned to me, and I felt that familiar sinking sensation in my stomach, like I was falling into quicksand. "He's doing really well financially. He could definitely help out." Suddenly, all eyes turned to me expectantly. Dad's hopeful and slightly desperate, Mom's pleading and guilt-laden, Derek's uncomfortable but resigned, and Laura's expectant, like the outcome was already decided and my bank account was already open. "How much money are we talking about here?" I asked carefully. Though I had a terrible sinking feeling, I already knew the answer. Laura pulled out her phone calculator with practiced efficiency. "Well, if everyone contributes absolutely everything they possibly can, we'd still need about $30,000. $30,000. For one day. For a party that would be over in 6 hours and forgotten by everyone except the couple within a year." I looked around the table at my family's faces, studying each expression carefully. Mom was practically holding her breath, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Dad was staring intently at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor rather than be part of this conversation. And Laura was looking at me with that expression I knew so well, the one that said I was being unreasonable and selfish for even hesitating to hand over my life savings. "I'll need to think about this," I said carefully. "Think about it." Laura's voice rose to that pitch that had summoned parental rescue throughout our childhood. "Sam, this is my wedding. Your only sister's wedding. What exactly is there to think about?" "Whether I can afford to drop $30,000 on a single day," I said, as evenly as possible. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Laura's eyes filled with tears. That emotional weapon she'd been perfecting and deploying since she was 5 years old. "It's not just a party," she whispered with practiced devastation. "It's the most important day of my life, and you're sitting there calling it a party like it means nothing." Mom immediately reached over and took Laura's trembling hand. "Sam, you know how much this means to her. You know how much she's dreamed about this day." And there it was, right on schedule. The familiar pressure, the suffocating guilt, The unspoken expectation that I would sacrifice my financial security, my future plans, my peace of mind for Laura's happiness, just like always. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of 34 years of family dynamics pressing down on my shoulders. Okay, I'll help. The relief in the room was immediate and palpable. Laura jumped up and hugged me tightly. Derek shook my hand with genuine gratitude, and Mom wiped away tears of relief. I forced a smile and told myself I was doing the right thing, that this was what family meant. That was my first catastrophic mistake. The second mistake was agreeing to pay for wedding expenses in installments rather than one lump sum. Laura explained with seemingly reasonable logic that vendors required deposits at different times, and it would be much easier to manage cash flow if I could just handle payments as they came due over the next 8 months. She would keep meticulous track of everything, she promised solemnly. She would make absolutely sure I knew exactly where every single dollar went. Over the next 8 months, the texts started arriving with clockwork regularity, each one phrased with careful gratitude and desperate urgency. Hey, Sam, the florist needs a $2,000 deposit by Friday, or we lose our date. Can you transfer it today? You're literally saving my life. Love you so much. Sam, the caterer wants their payment in full since we're within 60 days now. It's $8,500 total. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're seriously the best brother in the entire world. The photographer needs her final payment, $3,200. I can't believe how generous you're being. I'll never be able to repay you for making my dreams come true. Each text message came with increasingly effusive gratitude, endless reminders of how important this was, how much it meant to Laura, how I was single-handedly making her dreams come true. And like a complete fool, I kept paying, transfer after transfer, watching my carefully accumulated savings disappear into the bottomless pit of Laura's perfect day. The venue rental, the elaborate floral arrangements, the premium catering package, the professional photography and videography, the designer wedding dress, the bridesmaid dresses, the ceremony decorations, the reception music, the luxury transportation, the rehearsal dinner. Every single aspect of Laura's fairy tale wedding was being funded entirely by my bank account while she played the role of grateful recipient. I kept a detailed spreadsheet, of course. I'm a naturally organized person who tracks expenses carefully. By the end of July, just 1 month before the wedding, I had made 62 separate transfers totaling $31,847. Not the original estimate of $30,000, not even $32,000. Nearly $32,000 had vanished from my accounts. But I kept telling myself it was worth the sacrifice. Laura seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. The family was unified and excited. Derek seemed like a fundamentally good person who genuinely loved my sister. And I could technically afford it, even though it meant completely abandoning my plans to buy a larger house and postponing my dream of taking a 3-month sabbatical to travel through Europe. Then came August 15th, exactly 2 weeks before the scheduled wedding date. I was in my home office, working late on a particularly complex database optimization project for a demanding client, when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom that made my blood freeze. Sam, we need to talk immediately. Family meeting at our house tonight at 7 p.m. sharp. It's about the wedding. Very important. I figured maybe there were last-minute vendor complications to resolve, final details to coordinate, or the usual pre-wedding chaos that required family consultation. I saved my work, changed into decent clothes, and drove the 40 minutes to Mom and Dad's house, expecting to discuss centerpiece arrangements or seating charts. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, uncomfortable, charged with the kind of tension that precedes life-changing conversations. Laura was sitting rigidly on the couch next to Derek, her arms crossed defensively, and her face set in that stubborn expression I'd seen thousands of times during childhood arguments. Mom and Dad were in their usual chairs, but they refused to make eye contact with me, staring instead at their hands like they contained fascinating secrets. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing in the doorway. Dad cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. "Sam, please sit down. We need to discuss something important." I remained standing, my instincts screaming danger. "Just tell me what's wrong." Laura spoke first, her voice cold and unnaturally flat. "Derek and I have been talking extensively, and we've decided to make some significant changes to our wedding plans." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though my stomach was already churning with dread. She took a deep breath, like she was steeling herself for something monumentally unpleasant. "We want the celebration to be more intimate and meaningful, just immediate family and our very closest friends. Much more personal and special." I waited for her to continue explaining. When she didn't, I said, "Okay, and what does that mean exactly?" And Derek jumped in awkwardly, his voice strained. "We've decided to keep the guest list extremely small, very exclusive, and carefully curated." The pit in my stomach was expanding rapidly. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" Laura finally looked directly at me, her chin raised with defiant determination. "We don't want you at our wedding, Sam." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I actually staggered backward a step, grabbing the doorframe for support. "What did you just say?" "You heard me perfectly clearly. We don't want you there." "Laura, what the hell are you talking about? I'm your brother. I've paid for your entire wedding. And we genuinely appreciate everything you've done," Derek said quickly, his voice desperate. "But this is about creating exactly the right atmosphere and energy for our special day." I looked around the room desperately at my parents, waiting for them to speak up, to tell Laura she was being completely insane. Instead, Mom continued staring at her lap like it held the meaning of life, and Dad studied the wall with intense concentration. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "Dad, you're actually okay with this?" Mom finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and guilty. "Sam, honey, if this is truly what Laura wants and needs for her wedding day, be what Laura wants." My voice was rising despite my efforts to maintain control. "What about basic human decency? What about the fact that I've paid $32,000 for this wedding?" "That was entirely your choice," Laura said coolly, like she was stating an obvious fact. "Nobody held a gun to your head and forced you to help." I stared at her. This person who shared my DNA but felt like a complete stranger. Someone I'd never met before in my life. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why don't you want me at your wedding?" Laura and Derek exchanged one of those meaningful looks, those silent communications that couples develop over time. Finally, Laura spoke with cruel precision. "Because you make absolutely everything about money. Every single conversation, every family gathering, every casual interaction. You find some way to mention how much you make, how successful you are, how much you've helped everyone financially. It's exhausting and embarrassing, Sam. Derek and I want our wedding day to be about love and joy and celebration, not about how much everything costs and who paid for what." I felt like I'd been physically slapped. "I make everything about money? Laura, you text me twice a week asking for money. You've asked me to pay for your wedding, your rent, your car repairs, your medical bills, your credit card debt. When exactly am I supposed to discuss money, if not when you're constantly asking me for it? That's completely different. That's family helping family, which is normal. But you always act like we owe you something enormous. Like we should be grateful and indebted every minute of every day. Maybe because you should be grateful. Maybe normal people say thank you when someone drops $32,000 on their wedding. Maybe decent human beings don't bite the hand that feeds them." "There it is," Laura said triumphantly, like she'd just proven her point definitively. "You're doing it right now, making everything about the money and keeping score." I looked at Derek desperately, hoping for some trace of sanity or human decency. "You're actually okay with this? Taking my money and then excluding me?" Derek squirmed uncomfortably in his seat, unable to meet my eyes. "Sam, I honestly tried to talk her out of this decision, but Laura feels very strongly about it. And ultimately, it is her day. Her day that I completely funded." "Sam, please," Mom interjected weakly. "Don't make this situation harder than it has to be. Laura has the absolute right to invite whoever she wants to her wedding." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents were actively supporting Laura's decision to exclude me from the wedding I'd paid for, treating it like a reasonable request instead of a devastating betrayal. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said slowly, my voice deadly calm. "You want my money, but you don't want me present. You want me to pay for a celebration I'm banned from attending." "It's not about the money at all," Laura insisted with practiced sincerity. "Everything is always about money with you people," I snapped, my composure finally cracking. "But only when you desperately need it. When it's time to actually acknowledge where it comes from or show basic gratitude, suddenly I'm the villain for caring about money." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app with shaking fingers. The detailed spreadsheet I'd been maintaining was saved to my cloud storage, and I pulled it up on my phone screen. 62 transfers, I said, holding the phone so they could all see the screen. 62 separate payments over 8 months. $31,847. For a wedding I'm apparently not worthy of attending. Laura rolled her eyes dramatically. Here we go again with the detailed accounting and guilt trips. Something fundamental inside me snapped at that moment. "You know what, Laura? You're absolutely right. I do care deeply about money. I care about working my ass off to earn it. I care about being responsible with it. And I care about not letting manipulative people treat me like a personal ATM with legs. I was already scrolling through my phone contacts, looking for numbers I should have called months earlier. What are you doing? Mom asked nervously, finally showing some emotion. Calling all the vendors, I said with deadly calm. If I'm not invited to this wedding, then I'm not paying for this wedding. Laura shot to her feet like she'd been electrocuted. You can't do that. The wedding is in exactly 2 weeks. Watch me. I hit the first number on my list, Willowbrook Manor. While it rang, I looked steadily at my family. These people who had taken my generosity and love and thrown it back in my face like garbage. Hi, this is Sam Chen, I said, when the venue coordinator answered. I need to cancel the Thompson-Myers wedding scheduled for August 29th. Yes, I'm the person who's been making all the payments. Laura lunged desperately for my phone, but I stepped smoothly away from her. What do you mean there's a substantial cancellation fee? I said into the phone, my voice getting louder so my family could hear every word. How much exactly? $3,000? Fine, that's acceptable. Yes, I completely understand that the catering deposit is entirely non-refundable. Just cancel absolutely everything immediately. I hung up and immediately dialed Bella's Flowers. Sam, stop this right now! Derek pleaded desperately. You're being completely insane. Hi, Bella's Flowers. I need to cancel the complete floral order for the Thompson-Myers wedding on August 29th. Yes, all of it. Every arrangement, every bouquet, every centerpiece. Laura was crying now, producing full-blown hysterical sobs, but not the manipulative crocodile tears I was accustomed to. These seemed like genuine panic and devastation. You're destroying my wedding, she screamed at the top of her lungs. You're ruining the most important day of my entire life. You ruined it the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to attend. I replied calmly, then spoke into the phone. Yes, I understand there are penalty fees. Just cancel everything. One by one, I methodically called every single vendor. The photographer, the videographer, the premium caterer, the luxury transportation company, the live musicians. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Cancel everything immediately. Yes, I understand about the various fees and penalties. Yes, I'm absolutely certain. With each phone call, Laura became increasingly hysterical. Derek tried to physically stop me at one point, actually grabbing my arm, but I just walked outside to finish my calls in peace. By the time I completed the last call, Laura's fairy tale wedding had been reduced to whatever minimal deposits were completely non-refundable, and whatever the family could possibly scramble together with 2 weeks' notice and maybe $8,000 total. When I walked back into the house, the silence was absolutely deafening. Laura was curled up on the couch in a fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably into Derek's shoulder. Mom and Dad looked like they'd aged 20 years in the past hour. There, I said, with calm satisfaction. Problem solved completely. Now you can have exactly the intimate, small wedding you wanted, and you don't have to worry about me making everything about money. Sam, Mom said quietly, her voice broken, how could you possibly do something so cruel? I laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. How could I do this? I just spent $32,000 on a wedding I was told I couldn't attend. The better question is, how could all of you do this to me? Dad finally spoke up, his voice pleading. Son, maybe if you just apologized to Laura for whatever upset her, we could work this whole thing out. Apologized? For what exactly? For paying for her dream wedding? For being generous beyond reason? For caring about being treated with basic human respect? For being selfish and vindictive? Laura spat through her tears. For making my wedding day about your hurt feelings instead of my happiness. I stared at her, this person I'd loved and supported and sacrificed for throughout my entire adult life, and realized I didn't even recognize who she was anymore. Maybe I never had. You want to know what's truly selfish, Laura? Taking someone's money for 8 months straight, and then telling them they're not good enough to be part of the celebration that money made possible. Expecting someone to fund your dreams while treating them like human garbage. That's selfish. I headed toward the door but turned back one final time. You know what the truly funny thing is? I would have paid for your wedding happily, even if it meant eating ramen noodles for the next 2 years. All you had to do was treat me like family instead of a bank account with legs. But you couldn't even manage that basic level of human decency. Sam, wait! Derek called after me desperately. Maybe we can figure this out somehow. Maybe Laura was too hasty in her decision. No, I said firmly, my hand on the doorknob. She made her choice very clearly. She wanted an intimate wedding celebration without me. Now she's got exactly what she asked for. I walked out and drove home through the dark streets, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Not from anger anymore, but from the overwhelming relief of finally standing up for myself after 34 years. The phone call started within the first hour. First Mom, then Dad, then Derek, then various relatives who'd apparently been brought into the crisis, all of them delivering variations of the same message. I was being completely unreasonable. I was deliberately hurting Laura. I needed to fix this situation immediately. None of them asked how I was doing emotionally. None of them acknowledged that I'd been wronged. None of them seemed to care that I'd just been excluded from a wedding I'd completely funded. I let every single call go to voicemail and deleted them without listening. The next morning, I received a text from Laura. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what she'd done, but another demand. Sam, you need to call all the vendors back immediately and fix this disaster you created. You can't destroy my wedding just because you're mad about something stupid. This is bigger than your hurt feelings. Please be the bigger person here and do what's right. I read the text 4 times, each time feeling more amazed at her incredible audacity. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she still expected me to fix her problems and fund her dreams. I typed back, "Then pay for it yourselves, leeches." It was harsh, but it was completely honest. That's exactly what they were. Leeches who had been feeding off my financial success while treating me like an inconvenience to be managed. The text I sent apparently made the rounds quickly among the extended family, because suddenly everyone was calling me heartless, selfish, and cruel. Apparently, standing up for yourself and refusing to be exploited makes you the villain in some families. Over the next several days, I heard through the family grapevine exactly what was happening. Laura and Derek were frantically scrambling to find replacement vendors. But with 2 weeks' notice and a total budget of maybe $8,000, their options were severely limited. The fairy tale wedding had become a backyard barbecue with grocery store flowers. Mom called me crying, begging me to reconsider my decision. She's your only sister, Sam. Please don't let stubborn pride ruin this. It's not pride, Mom. It's called self-respect, something I should have developed a long time ago. But think about the family. What family? The family that decided I wasn't worthy of being included in the most important celebration in my sister's life? That family? A week before the original wedding date, Derek showed up at my house unannounced. He looked absolutely terrible, exhausted and stressed, like he hadn't slept in days. "Sam, please," he said when I opened the door. "I know Laura hurt you badly. I know what she did was wrong, but she's completely falling apart. The stress is making her physically sick. Please, just help us get through this wedding, and then we can deal with all the other issues later." I almost felt sorry for him. He seemed like a genuinely decent person who'd gotten caught up in Laura's toxic drama through no fault of his own. "Derek, let me ask you something important. When Laura told me I wasn't invited to the wedding, did you think that decision was wrong?" He hesitated uncomfortably. I tried my best to talk her out of it. "But did you personally think it was wrong?" "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I thought it was very wrong. And yet you went along with it anyway. You were willing to take my money while excluding me from the celebration. What exactly does that make you?" He didn't have an answer for that question. "I genuinely feel bad for you, Derek. You're marrying into a family that will systematically drain you dry and then blame you when you have nothing left to give. Good luck with that situation. The wedding happened on schedule, sort of. From what I heard through the family gossip network, it was held in Mom and Dad's backyard, with about 20 guests, grocery store flowers arranged by Laura's friend, and catering from a local deli. Not exactly the fairy tale celebration Laura had spent months dreaming about and planning. I spent that Saturday working peacefully in my garden, enjoying the profound peace and quiet of not being anyone's emergency financial contact or personal ATM. The aftermath was entirely predictable. Laura was devastated that her dream wedding had been destroyed. The extended family was divided between those who thought I'd been completely justified and those who thought I'd been unnecessarily cruel. Derek's family, from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, was horrified by the whole situation and what it revealed about my family's toxic dynamics. But here's what absolutely nobody expected. I felt genuinely free for the first time in years. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying the crushing financial and emotional burden of my family's endless problems. I wasn't getting constant texts asking for money or panicked calls, demanding I fix someone else's crisis. I was just living my own life, making my own decisions, spending my own hard-earned money on myself and my own dreams. It was absolutely liberating. 3 months later, I received a letter from Laura. An actual handwritten letter, which genuinely surprised me. In it, she finally apologized extensively. She said she understood now that she'd been taking shameless advantage of my generosity for years, that she'd hurt me more deeply than she could have imagined, and that she desperately wanted to make things right between us. It was actually a good letter, thoughtful, genuinely remorseful, full of the kind of honest self-reflection I'd been waiting to see from her for decades. But it was too late. Not because I'm vindictive or unforgiving by nature, but because I'd learned something critically important about myself and about family. I learned that being generous doesn't automatically make you a good person if people can systematically exploit that generosity without any consequences. I learned that family doesn't mean you have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Most importantly, I learned that my money, my time, my emotional energy, and my mental health are genuinely valuable, and I don't owe them to anyone just because we happen to share DNA. I wrote Laura back, a short but polite response. I told her I appreciated her apology and could see it was sincere, but that I was no longer interested in being part of a family dynamic where I was valued exclusively for what I could provide financially. I wished her genuine happiness in her marriage and her future life, but I was moving forward without them. It's been a year since the wedding that wasn't. Laura and Derek are still married, though I hear through mutual acquaintances that money remains extremely tight and they're struggling to get established financially. Mom and Dad have reached out several times, testing the waters carefully to see if I've gotten over being hurt. I'm not hurt anymore. I'm just completely done. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.